Welcome everybody. We're here to talk about loss of attraction, and it's not lost on me that I have a big bandage on my swollen, bruised face. On a day that we're talking about loss of attraction, but good thing that John is not here. I went to the doctor yesterday, and they wanted to remove a lump that they were a little concerned about. So anyway, I have a bit of a swollen face today. So so let me just this is obviously a topic that's really uh, important to a lot of people. Christy told me there was a lot of questions. Um, Menopause didn't get as many as this one. But I think it's a charged topic in part because it's hard to really, there's so many factors that have to do with something as nuanced and delicate as attraction. Attraction is something that maybe we wish we had more control over than we do. And yet it's so important in a marriage that's thriving and intimate and happy. And so I want to talk about just some sort of foundational ideas before I take up any of the questions. And acknowledging that some of these may relate to your situation and others will not. And again, it can be a little bit sensitive on both sides of this. So let me just start with the first idea, which is that that all of us are not attracted some of the time to our partners, right? So it's just true that in a long-term marriage, you're going to have moments where you do not feel attracted. What your spouse is doing is actually killing desire. Again, that kind of delicate energy that can get destroyed with the wrong comment, with the bad smell, with the annoying behavior that you hate so much. And so, in any honest marriage, absence of attraction is going to be a part of it some of the time. Um, and so, even if your spouse is very attractive in some conventional sense, if you're paying attention, there's going to be, this is why movie stars can get divorced. This is why supermodels are not necessarily with someone that's attracted to them, because who you are as a person has a lot to do with attraction. And also habituation has a lot to do with attraction. So when we get bored, when we start to take the other person for granted, right? Attraction goes down. Novelty pushes attraction up. So even if the very same spouse that you're married to, you were to meet again now, having not known them at all, and you were single, you would very likely find them appealing or compelling. Now, some of you would be like, no, I wouldn't. Okay. And we're going to talk about that. But that is to say, if you just were meeting them for the first time, you would very likely find them appealing on some level, just because of the fact of being someone you do not know, that there's mystery there again. Even rams will ejaculate more quickly with a new female lamb, right, than if it's the same you, right? And so our brains are somehow wired for this issue of novelty. And we love security in a marriage, right? But we can do a lot of things to really kill novelty, kill a sense of aliveness. We can make it so predictable that we can take each other for granted, that we can never do anything new, never stretch ourselves, never try, move into resentment, so that the boredom and the resentment can kill any eros energy that was initially there, right? And so much of my courses are about really looking at how are you in relationship. The two couples courses, and especially enhancing sexual intimacy, is very much about how are you in relationship to your partner, to partnering, to keeping this eros energy alive in your life and in your marriage, because it's such an important part of a thriving attraction-based marriage, like an intimate marriage. So again, the issue of resentment, the character issues of our spouse, they could kill attraction even in a good marriage. Boredom can undermine attraction, even in a good marriage, and also how we feel about ourselves, right? Big deal in attraction, right? We if we feel bad about ourselves, if we feel unattractive, stressed in our lives, not happy, it's both going to make us less desirable and make desire go down. Um, it's not, I'm just making sure that that's, okay, this is it's not possible for a marriage to live up to the initial chemistry of when you first met. Well, I don't think that's really fair to say. But what I mean is, it's not going to be that intensity like an affair can be, or the intensity of initially, like where when I first met John, I'm like, smiling all the time. My brain's flooded with dopamine. I mean, that even though I can still feel intense attraction now, it's not like it's in that energy all the time. And so I think long-term attraction, it just requires something more of us. It's not happening to us. It's not just, you know, coming over us and we can't do anything about it. That's what usually is happening initially. And sometimes we feel it when we don't even want to feel it, right? But when you're in a long-term marriage, it has a lot more to do with what you cultivate in yourself and in the marriage. Gratitude, for example, acknowledgement, not taking the other person for granted, imagining, and recognizing how much they offer to your life in a day-to-day way. And it's also developing ourselves into more loving people, as I'm going to talk about. It's learning how to actually cherish another individual and cherish them as a man or a woman, cherish their individuality, and learning how to bring more of your honest self into a marriage, right? Those are all the character issues that are at stake in attraction, that are so critical to attraction. And again, these are all a part of my couples courses, and the Art of Loving and Art of Desire has so much to do with our self-development, the development of our sexuality, and our ability to really love and choose and bring our best to a partner, right? So I'm going to be, as I go through some of the questions, hitting on a lot of the character issues that are a part of love and desire, but also looking at this sort of foundational experience of attraction, right? So there's a lot of reasons for non-attraction. And in a more, as I say, it's always a part of every marriage at times, but then there's people that struggle in a much more fundamental way. It's much more of a problem in the marriage. And the first that I'll talk about is when attraction doesn't exist and never has. That, you maybe loved your partner, you maybe respected them, but you knew that you weren't very attracted. And some people I've worked with, they did it because they believed that was the more right thing to do. That is to say that attraction's not that important, and this is a good person, and the family likes them, and the bishop thinks it's a good idea or whatever. And they're just like, okay, what I want is too superficial anyway, so I'll marry them, and the most important thing already exists. And I think that's a misguided idea, and some genuine people entered into marriage under that understanding. And I actually think attraction is very, very important as an initial experience. You want that initial click almost. That doesn't mean that, I had that initial click with my spouse. I opened the door, he was dating my roommate, and I immediately just thought, this person is attractive to me, like in a fun, and 5 minutes of talking to him, I felt a really visceral attraction. But it took me 3 years to marry. I mean, first of all, I didn't start dating him for another year until after they had broken up. But also 3 years before I actually could really step in. So it doesn't mean that that's all that it takes, and if you have that, you're good, of course. But I do think it's an important part of the foundation that there is that initial chemistry. And in all the romantic films and so on, there is that, that people have the chemistry, and of course they hate each other at first and all the romantic, and they fight and they struggle with each other, and then eventually they fall in love. But the point is, there is that initial chemistry that's already at work, and it matters. There are people that I've worked with that have been attracted to many other people, but then they marry somebody that they're actually less attracted to because it feels safer to them, because they're afraid of their sexuality, because they're afraid that the people they really, really were emotionally attuned or attracted to they were going to feel too vulnerable, and so they chose somebody that they could actually be sort of less open to, less uh what's the word, like less infatuated, less overcome with. And so it was actually a way of feeling less vulnerable in the marriage. So it's really hard to change something that never existed. It's really hard to say if that was just really not there. I don't know that there's a lot of luck or a lot of work. I haven't had much success with helping people that never had it to get it. Usually I have people that had it at first, even while dating, they really had the attraction. And then, like, upon getting engaged, even it went away, or upon getting married, it went away. But they still did have it as an initial draw, an initial reality. It's the people that never ever had it, it's hard to imagine how you get that back. Or, it's like the guy who has a car accident and he asks the surgeon, will I be able to play the violin after I heal? And the doctor says, yes, you should be able to play the violin. He says, oh, good, because I couldn't play it before, right? It's that kind of idea. I don't know. I'm not here to say that I know you can't get it, but I think it's something more visceral and biological. John Gottman did some research, and I haven't been able to find the original research, and I can't remember where I heard him say this, so take it with a bit of a grain of salt. But I remember him talking about the fact that there's some research that showed there's just certain people you're going to be attracted to. You walk into a room and there's going to be certain people for whom you have that click, and that that matters. It's There's a type that you generally will always be drawn to, and I think it has a lot to do with you know polarity, with opposite energy, um, yin and yang. That there's a lot of times you're drawn to people that have a different kind of energy. Like if you're more outgoing, you like that sort of grounded energy. If you're more grounded, you like that energetic, spontaneous energy. Um, and I've always been drawn to kind of tall, thin guys. Sometimes like wait, I remember my brother and I once were like some guy who he like was not very attractive, but he was pretty tall and kind of gaunt and just seemed like a kind person, but really not very conventionally attractive. And I remember saying to my brother after he and I were talking to him about a contract that we were doing, I remember saying to my brother, I think that guy was like attractive. And he's like, that guy? Like almost nobody else in the, be nice to this person, but I mean, he wasn't what you would expect as attractive, but there was just something about what I think was like a kind of a vulnerability I could track in that person. And I think John has a lot of that. They're like tall, very slender, and had some of that sort of overt vulnerability that you could track in the quietness and so on. And so that is just kind of a type of person I was often drawn to. And I think people have their own version of that. Now, again, you can have that energy and then you can squelch it, right? So you can find, and then in the way you do your marriage, you can kill it. You can kill it with resentment. You can, focus on everything the spouse is not, and kill that initial chemistry, or at least, mask it under piles of resentment. But I think this is really valuable in marriage. Now, I have, and this has come up in some of the questions, I have sometimes talked about the fact that marrying somebody that you're not very attracted to is a relatively indecent thing to do, right? And my goal in saying that is not to shame people, but I think it's a way I'm pushing for one's integrity, that because a lot of times when we say, oh, I'm not attracted, we're saying it kind of like a victim, like this thing has happened to me and I've never felt it. Therefore, I can't do anything about it. Like I can't do anything about the fact that don't want to have sex with you because I've secretly never been attracted to you. And it's trying to push people out of a complacency and a victim idea when in fact it's a pretty unfair thing to do to somebody, especially if you didn't let them know that that's how you felt. Especially if you kept that from them because you thought that was going to keep them from marrying you if they knew that you felt as little attraction as you did. And to imagine, how would I feel if my spouse had done the same to me, right? That they had known they weren't very attracted, but didn't want the risk of me breaking up the relationship or it not happening, and therefore didn't tell me. But then I connected my life to someone who doesn't really find me appealing. And that's a very painful thing to do. And so I think my goal in saying that is to push the person who has invited someone into their life that they don't really desire to really move more towards what is my moral obligation in this marriage, right? Given the mistake that I made, or given that I invited this person into my life under the auspices of a romantic partnership, but I really didn't have the romantic feelings to sustain what I was suggesting I was offering. And so what is the right thing to do now? And it's not easy, right? Especially, it's one thing if you're 1 year into marriage, it's maybe a different question than if you're 20 years into marriage and you have children and a mortgage. I don't know what the right thing to do is. And life is seldom about easy decisions on this front, but it's at least pushing the person who invited that one in without really being attracted around what's the really most loving, fair thing to do. Because if I'm just here like in a victim idea, well, I'm not that attracted and there's not really anything I can do about it, and I've tried, but I can't. That's not the same energy as, look, I want to do right by this person. I care about them. I care about the fact that I invited them into my life without being able to really give them what they thought they were going to get in marrying me. And what is the most fair thing for me to do? Is it to let them go? Is it to raise the kids and then let them go? Is it to choose in a different way, not as a victim, but really like, I'm going to make this marriage as right as I can and bring more of my morality to that, right? Because there is some flexibility in how much, when we really bring our best, we do see our partner differently. When we really do live in gratitude and acknowledgement of our role in loving another person, well, that goes a long way in the question of attraction and the question of desire. So, so again, it's not to just make people feel ashamed, of course, but more about what is my actual obligation to do the right thing. Okay, for some, the attraction was never there, right? For some, they lose attraction because they live very critically. And it's a way of actually kind of getting control in a marriage, by indulging the part of you that dislikes, that is not pleased, that is not happy with. Some people live their life, they fall in love with everything, they're pleased with everything, they see the good in everything. They see the good in their partner. My mother-in-law was very, very much like this. She just cherished her husband so much. She would just talk about, he's this way, I love this about him. And he is and was so many good things to Mary. There's no question. But it was also the way she oriented to who he was. She could have picked at and found flaws and limitations if she'd wanted to, but she loved loving him. She loved cherishing who he was. And so she would genuinely go on about how lucky she was to be with such a good man. And so that's the opposite. I remember her being in the car with me, and we were driving up to pick up Norris, her husband, my father-in-law. And at the time, Norris was probably 75. I mean, maybe even a little bit older, right? And as we and as we were driving up to pick him up, he was waiting there at the curb. She's like, "Oh my gosh, isn't he so handsome? Isn't he so handsome?" And he is handsome. There's no question about it. But it's also like just the way that she related to him and saw him, which is just a wonderful example. And fortunately, I have a husband who learned a lot of that from his mom, because I get a lot of that same kind of just open cherishing because of how he chooses to see me. So, some people do the opposite of that, which is that they they focus on what they're not getting. They focus on life in an entitled way, and it's a kind of safety. Like, and they've been trained to do it maybe in their family of origin. They find it easier to, first of all, it's pretty human to do this, to look at what we're not getting, not all the amazing things that we do get, that we do have, but it's using it as a way to kind of pressure the idea that you're owed more, not that you need to give more. Um, where when we cherish, we're acknowledging how much someone matters to us without the guarantee of them loving us back, right? Without letting the limitation or what is absent overrun all the good that's there. And so there's a lot of moral good in being able to cherish and value and to see the good that's in another person. Is what we all long for. I have worked with couples where one just is always in a stance of critique, a male or a female doing that to their partner. It's a way of saying, I don't owe you anything, you owe me something. It's a way of saying, if you were better, I would love you. And it's an attempt at control, even if one is not consciously scheming to do that. But it's a way of getting the marriage to revolve around you through the kind of low, what's the way I want to say it? It's a way of getting control in a marriage rather than having power in a marriage. So in the positive sense. So it's like, I'm going to give the idea that I would love you and cherish you if you were better, if you were doing something more for me. And because the other person's sense of self is so closely connected to you, you can easily exploit that through critique. I worked with a couple a few years ago where the guy, like a month into marriage, basically says to his wife, I'm not attracted to you. And I was before we got married, but now I'm not. And he kind of announces it as like not like, I think I've made a mistake and I need to get out and I'm going to get out. Okay. Because even as painful as that would be, it was still better than what he did, which is he kind of announced he's not attracted, kept that alive, but never would go anywhere while calling himself a victim. And so she's busy trying to change herself. She got plastic surgery. She did all these things of trying to get him to be attracted to her. And then years into marriage, he reached out because, hey, my wife is not interested in sex with me. And of course she's not. Of course she's not, because even though she is still trying to earn love and sometimes sexual to do that, that's very different than I dare to really open up to you, to surrender to you, to be open-hearted with you, to desire you with my whole heart, because it's not safe to do that, because you always are in a critique of me. You're always looking for where I'm getting things wrong, for where I'm not enough for you. You live in the idea that you deserve more. And the partner of that person may be sexual, but they're not going to open their full heart up. I was talking to my husband about some of these issues yesterday, just sort of talking through it. And he said to me, I'm honestly more attracted to you now than I was when we were dating. He said, that's really the truth of it. And I said, why do you think? And he said, well, when we were dating, I was more guarded. Like, I definitely was interested in you, but because you were ambivalent and I wasn't sure, I just I didn't let my whole heart go in. I wanted the relationship to work out, but I was holding myself back and not letting myself be fully attracted. Once we married and I knew you were really there, then I could love you like with my whole heart. And then I'm just he's right. You start to define in my mind what attractive is because it's you, right? Because it's who you are. Thank goodness. And we all need that, especially as we're getting older. But that's about love and desire being about, I fully have stepped in, I fully choose you. And when we live in critique, it's our way of saying, I don't owe you something. I can imagine you owe me, and then I'll love you. Now, I don't mean that you can't run your marriage or that you can't talk about things that are difficult, because that's what I'm going to get to next. In fact, choosing is linked to being honest with your partner. It's when you don't tell them the truth, when you mask that you're not attracted, or you mask what's the trouble in the marriage, that can also be really indecent, right? Because you're not giving the marriage a chance. So I'm not saying you can't address things that need to be addressed. That is a way of saying the marriage matters enough to me that I'm willing to have this hard conversation and really sort this out with you, to look at myself and to look at you, and for us to figure out what we really need to do. Um, so I'm not saying going blind per se, but you're not petty, and you're not using criticism as a way of not choosing the other person. So the last one I just want to cover is uh, lots of attraction because your spouse is, or you are doing this, and so your spouse is not attracted to you, that you're kind of giving up on life, that you're not invested in bringing your best self to the marriage. So you're living in thanatos energy. So, a lot of what I think and talk about is that eros energy is part of why attraction is so powerful, falling in love, right? Sex, when we deeply desire and love someone, is so soul expanding and even spiritual, is because it's connecting us to eros energy, which is life-giving energy. Eros energy is, when you go on a new adventure, when you travel to a place you've never gone before, when you climb a mountain, when you learn something new, that's all expansive energy. And we love it as human beings. We like stability and we like predictability, but we love growth. Growth is what expands us and makes us feel alive. And so when sex is good, it's full of eros energy, right? When sex is bad, it has thanatos energy in it. Like a red light district is full of despair, right? That's the opposite energy. Despair, grief, giving up, that's thanatos. So you can lose attraction when you feel that your spouse, when you're not trying, when you're in thanatos energy, when you're depressed, when you're giving up, when you live resentfully, when you live in a sense of fear, self-doubt, self-hatred, right? That's going to kill the eros energy in a marriage, whether it's in you or in your partner. If you have a spouse that's giving up, is depressed, is anxious and overwhelmed, they're in their own despair, they're no longer trying, they're not showering, they're not taking care of themselves, they're depressed, okay, like, as much as you can love the person that's maybe going through the hard time, that's going to be much harder to be attracted to, right? And so, the movie I Feel Pretty, right? It's Amy Schumer is the actress, I think. And just to give you the basic premise of the movie, she's someone who is, I don't know, 20 pounds heavier than she wishes she were, and always in this kind of self-hatred and self-loathing and trying to change who she is, doesn't have a boyfriend. And then she like falls off her exercise bike, hits her head. And when she comes to, she sees herself differently. She sees herself as thin and attractive. And so she starts to behave as an attractive woman, even though she's precisely the same size. And soon enough, she has a boyfriend, and she's attractive, genuinely, because she's full, in my view, of that eros energy. She feels, good about herself. She owns her attractiveness. And so it makes her both have more desire and be more desirable. I remember my husband, I've said this too many times for those of you who follow me, but I remember my husband saying to me in the first few months of marriage, where I was kind of panicked that I was going to gain weight, and because I was no longer doing long distance running because I was having issues with my knees, and And I was just afraid, what if I gain weight and I'm not attractive to you anymore? And he just said, like, that is not an issue. You could gain 40 pounds, it would be okay. Like, you have a lot of latitude with me. He just said, what would be hard for me is if you started to dislike yourself. And I think he was 100% on point, that so much of good couples energy, like for women, Esther Perel talks about this, is that it's a turn on for women to be the turn on. And so as a woman, you kind of need to see yourself as attractive to have desire, that you have to say, like, I would be a good choice. And if I don't feel like a good choice, what do I need to address in myself to feel more that way? It's probably putting away beauty magazines, because those are a very rigid idea of what constitutes attractive, but living in a life, in a energetic and sort of life embracing way. And I think men are often attracted to self-confidence in their wives. And I ask men what turns them on. That comes up frequently, that seeing their wives as, comfortable in her own skin, comfortable with herself, right? So when you have a spouse that's in this place of self-rejection, self-loathing, not caring about themselves, taking the marriage for granted, behaving in ways that are undesirable, right? Then I think if you choose and love your partner, it's being willing and able to talk about those things. Now you have to filter it through your own. Am I just in that place of critique? Is it me, right? Am I just someone who's so unwilling to love that I'm just focused on the limitations and I just need to bring better to my spouse who's having a hard go, right? And just care and not get, too thrown off by them having a bit of a tough time? Or is there something that I need to address because I do want to have a good sexual relationship, because I want the marriage to thrive? And if it's coming from that stronger place, it's not being said to justify oneself. It's not being said out of anger or contempt for the difficulty your spouse may be having. It's being said out of a desire for the marriage and your partner to be well. That you're saying it with the goal of waking the marriage up a bit and the partnership up a bit to what needs to be addressed or dealt with to for the marriage to continue to thrive. Now,
Understood.
again, if your spouse is just having a hard time and needs some extra support and some extra love
No,
and some
no,
extra
understood.
understanding, that's one thing. If it's a kind of chronic not dealing with one's life, taking advantage of the marriage in a sense by not dealing with one's life, well, then that's a different level of need in terms of a response. This person says, what do you do if your spouse confesses that they never were attracted to you? After 15 plus years together and 2 kids, my wife finally was able to be honest with me after I told her I was feeling that she didn't like me as a person. She admitted to marrying me because I provided a safe and secure environment for her, but she never felt a romantic attraction, even while dating for me, but even while dating for me, but she had those feelings for other men she dated before me. She wants to stay together as she has everything she wants in life, and also believes that she will never be able to build that attraction. I've been studying and researching everything I can on my situation, which isn't commonly talked about, and I haven't found a lot of positive options. It feels like I'm at a point of choose your heart, either accept there will be no romantic elements in my life or break up my family and try to start again. I mean, I think, unfortunately and sadly, I think you are probably right that you're at that choose your hard situation. Um, you know, in a way, your wife is saying, I have what I want. I wanted safety and security. I wanted to have a family. I maybe even wanted to be with somebody I wasn't that attracted to. I mean, sometimes when people have come out of sexual trauma, or they, you know, maybe were attracted to the kind of the bad boy in a sense, and they felt like there was something unsafe about sexuality and unsafe about their sexuality or men's sexuality, they will often choose the partner that they track as more apologetic sexually, the nice guy, the one that they don't have to kind of take seriously because he has enough self-doubt. And no, very seldom is someone scheming to do this. They just intuitively say, this person feels safer. In fact, some of the research shows that women will acknowledge, that certain men are attractive and they find them attractive, but when they ask the question of who would you like to partner with, then they actually prefer men that are less attractive. And I think that there's the idea of, if I were married to a super attractive man, then he might cheat on me, or he might think he could do better than me. Where a man that's just more normal, that's who women tend to want to partner with. But, you know, was she in a way understanding or tracking some of your own ambivalence about your own desirability, about your own sexuality, and so hasn't had to deal with your sexuality in a way, hasn't had to make a more integrity-based and honest choice when it comes to you, in part because you've tolerated not really being chosen. And it sounds like you're starting to wake up to this a little bit and start to have more honest conversations. And it's possible that there's nothing your wife can do about this, that she's cared about it, she's tried, she's taken real responsibility, and she can't do anything about it. It's not there for her. But it's also possible that she hasn't needed to, because it's not been enough of an issue in the stability of the marriage, for lack of a better way of saying it. And so she's been able to basically have what she wants, but not have to take the risk of really choosing you, really loving you, really creating an intimate partnership with you. And so if you haven't taken the men's course, I would suggest taking the Art of Loving. There's a lot of great support in the online Facebook group, the Art of Loving group, for the men that are taking the course. It can be really helpful for working through what's happening in your marriage, what role you may be playing in that dynamic, and what you can do to make a decision or engage in a way in your marriage that you can feel has integrity in it, and then you feel good about. Because that's usually what drives positive change in the marriage, if there can be positive change, or at least allows you to live in a deliberate way, in a thoughtful way, around what you can't control. So how does one, somebody writes the question, how does one grow into cherishing a spouse when they develop habits that are very unattractive and would be immediate red flags if they weren't a spouse? I would never agree to date a person with certain habits. How can I convince myself to overlook these habits in my spouse without feeling like I'm going against my personal values? Some examples could be a decline in hygiene, disregard for social mores, drug and alcohol use, a more intense temper, etc. Yeah, well, without knowing which of those is specifically your situation, it sounds like any number of those is a pretty serious decline in functioning in your partner, right? That they're not taking care of themselves, they're disregarding social mores, they're using drugs and alcohol, more intense temper. Those are really pretty problematic behaviors. Um, and so I don't think the goal is to overlook them per se, but to address them with the goal of creating a partnership. That is to say, I love you, and these behaviors matter to me. They are not behaviors that I think you respect, or they're not behaviors that I respect and can feel good about. And I don't think they're ones that you respect or feel good about. And so I don't want my attraction to go down. I don't want to not have a close relationship with you, but they are interfering. And I love you. And I also hope you love yourself and us enough to address what's happening in your life, to get some help if you need it. Because I want to want you. I want to have a good relationship with you. So it is a function of investment, even though it's talking about difficult things. A lot of times when I'm working with couples, either in the live events, right, or in a coaching session, I'm helping people to actually see things that they're colluding in keeping off the table, like something that's hard between them, but they don't want to address it directly. You know, a couple I worked with recently where I was saying, your wife does not desire you. Now, I wasn't saying there's no chance she could ever desire him or that he wasn't a desirable guy, but more that they kept wanting to pretend otherwise through, scheduled sex, through like guilting her, through all these things. And instead of dealing with the truth that she didn't desire him and that she wanted to have sex with him once a week while feeling like a victim of that, then actually deal with the fact that she really hadn't chosen him. And he didn't want to deal with that fact either. He was really terrified of it. It wasn't until the truth between them could be kind of laid out that they could start to have more honest conversations and start dealing with that and figure out who they each were going to be around that truth. And the goal is not to destroy the couple, but to help people address what they're avoiding, because then usually they can address it with more integrity. They can come at it differently, right? So for many people in that kind of situation, he might say, look, I'm not going to keep trying to get sex that you don't want to have with me. Or she might say, wait, I don't want to be somebody who just, is never choosing you and have you stop pursuing me. Right. So it often pushes people to get into a position that they can back up more by getting more truth there. So again, you're not saying the truth to justify yourself or to critique or to say to the other person, you're the problem. I have nothing to do with it. The goal is to talk honestly about the problem so that you can, in fact, have a better marriage. Okay, this person says, I'm physically attracted to my husband, but his personality is very annoying and it's not attractive to me at all. I love him as a person, but I don't enjoy being around him and I find myself happier when he's not around. This is not new. It's been going on since we were dating, and I have just been in denial and um, have stuck it out for 20 plus years. But now I'm exhausted with pretending, which is very interesting, the pretending part. I mean, that's going to kill attraction like nothing else, because real attraction has to be on a foundation of truth, right? And so that pretending is just going to create resentment and pretense between both of you. He thinks I'm amazing, quote unquote, and perfect, quote unquote. He's probably afraid to think anything else, right? Because he already knows your willingness to be sexual with him is probably conditional upon him thinking that, or, or that it's fragile. He thinks I'm quote unquote wonderful. So the pressure to reciprocate is strong, but the feeling just isn't there. Is there a way to learn to like the man I married when most things about his personality are just annoying to me? What I would say is that, just to be completely honest with you, it's that it's not very kind. That you're living in critique and entitlement. I don't know what's so annoying about him, right? And what you're so unable to accept. It's one thing if somebody has a substance abuse problem, that can be hard to accept and one ought not to. It's another thing to just say, I just don't like who he is. And yet I have taken all the validation that I get from him. I pretend to like him when really I have contempt for him. But I think it's unfair to him. I think it's unkind to him. I think that you're doing what I talked about earlier of living in a kind of critique that makes you safe and allows you to extract something without giving something, right? So what's been the advantage for you in hiding, right? Why does he think you're so amazing? Do you think he, goes blind to you? Does he feel like he must see you that way to keep the relationship together? And why do you find it so difficult to accept this man? I mean, if there's real things that need to be addressed, which I don't see in the question, so I'm going to assume for a second that there is something that's significant, well, then maybe it's worth addressing. If there's something specific, I think that you're living in a kind of critique that's not kind. It's probably familiar to you. You probably know it from your own family of origin. It's You may very well induce the insecurity in your partner that is partly what you find annoying, right? When you treat somebody with some contempt, they often get more annoying, both because of how you see them, but also because they're in reaction to the contempt that they can feel. And so I think you need to look at your own participation in a spouse that um, you don't find very desirable. I have to say, when I was dating my husband, I was leaning out. I was in more of a position of critique. I found that safer. It felt easier to me. I was kind of terrified of really stepping in and choosing. And then John, I think, being more guarded with me, being more, in some ways, like a little more walled because it wasn't as safe. I would then take those things and say, see, I don't know if this is the place I really want to be. Well, once I finally said, look, I want this enough to not choose out of it, so I'm going to fully choose in, and I'm putting both feet in, and I took the risk of doing that. What was amazing to me was how much better the relationship got. Not just that I felt better about me, which I did, but I encountered a different partner. Like, John was more deeply in. He was more open-hearted. He was more cherishing. He was more all the things that I was afraid I wasn't going to have. And I remember I was seeing a therapist at the time. I remember her saying to me, you're never going to know what this relationship is capable of unless you change your actual position in it. You're not going to get any more information while leaning out. You don't know what is possible until you grow up and step in a different way. And I would say the same to this person. Let me see. I'm going to do this one. Um, the husband writes this: whether as a result of teenage viewing of pornography and or some other early in life instilled view of what my wife's body would look like once we got married, I experienced immediate disappointment and lack of attraction in how she looked naked once we got married, specifically how her breasts looked. I struggled with this view for 12 years and eventually turned back to porn use during that time and falsely and regretfully justified that choice and the associated deception for almost 9 years. I recently, sorry, one second, let's see. Sorry, I just lost my place here. Oh yeah, I recently disclosed the porn viewing 2 months ago, and in divulging everything related to that, also shared this disappointment and lack of attraction that I've had that I've never shared with her before. So my question is, what tools, thought work, exercises, therapy, or whatever would you suggest to help me work through this issue? It's been easy for me to hide this all the years as I exist mostly in the one down, although I would say that's a kind of one up, where I don't want to be open or known. Uh, yes, I mean, I would say you've been walled, and to be in that critique is a kind of one up, a covert one up. I'm now trying to do all I can to become more open and create a true and strong sense of self so I can understand and accept myself better and show up more completely in our marriage. So I think my response would have to start with you acknowledging, I think this is a really important beginning place to getting to be a more solid person that doesn't have to hide all the time, right? Is that you have a problem with loving another person, right? With really loving your spouse for who she is. Um, and I don't know a lot about your marriage based on what you've said here, but I'm assuming that this is a woman who has loved you, who has cared about you, and you have, you know, fixated on what could be better. And of course, she could do the same with you, right? I mean, couldn't we all do that if we wanted to find what is imperfect and undesirable and not ideal in our partner? I mean, everybody can do that. And so, I can understand how you've hidden and maybe been less honest and knowable in your marriage. But that rejection is a way of really, it doesn't actually matter if it's one up or one down. It's really about not really choosing and loving the person that you're with. And so I think it's made more problematic by literally a steady diet of Cheetos, or at least as a child being brought up on Cheetos. Okay, what I'm saying is, when you're looking at porn, yes, I think that's probably true. It's a very unfortunate thing in a lot of ways when we're given so much junk food that it makes it, I think, harder. If we just do the food metaphor for a minute, if you really do grow up and develop a palate for Cheetos, it's much harder to actually be able to see and taste how good roasted Brussels sprouts with balsamic reduction on them taste, right? Because you haven't developed the palate. And so you can't even experience the actual beauty and soul sustenance that is there. And then when you can kind of escape and say, I wish I had better, I wish I had better, you can't actually see all the life energy that's in your partner, and you're taking the more superficial form of it. Now, I think when you live in a way that you don't respect, and that you're in more of this kind of superficial sustenance like that, it makes it much harder to love well and be loved deeply. It's all happening in the superficial, and the struggles happening in the superficial. When my husband is 64. He's a very attractive 64. He really is, actually, genuinely. But I think that he's just, because of the meaning of this person that has loved me well, that has cared about me, that I love, right? The attractiveness is in the meaning. And when you don't love well enough to create a deeper kind of friendship, a deeper kind of meaning, you don't make room for that kind of soul sustaining attraction to be a part of the marriage. So, to your question of like, what work do I do here? What can I do? Um, I think it's in confronting. I have approached my partnership in a superficial way, perhaps in part because I fear my own lovability and fear my own worthiness, and so have fixated on things I don't like. Well, if she could do the same with me, that's for sure. And do I really want, okay, yes. I mean, don't we all, I mean, couldn't we all find breasts we find more attractive than the ones that we are, partnered with? Couldn't we all find men we find more attractive than the one we're partnered with? Yeah, of course we could. But can I choose this person, right? This one. And can I love them? And can I ask for their forgiveness and my difficulty of really loving the whole person? The wife of this partner, wrote in and said, oh my gosh, like, what do I do? Because now what? I can't handle in such a kind of vulnerable space to know that he rejects. How do I feel turned on? Right? Because again, as Esther Perel talks about, for women, being turned on is to be the turn on. And if I know that I'm not that for him, what do I do? And I don't have an easy answer in that, because I appreciate the husband here is trying to get more honest, but I think the honesty that matters is I've not been a very loving person, and I've really looked more at what I can get through marriage than what I can give. And I want to learn how to be someone who can actually give, because I think if there's that change of heart, then there's the potential for a change of meaning between you, and more ability to create something about an intimate friendship. That's really, I mean, it's all going to be sagging in a few years here for everybody. Okay. And so how do I create an intimate friendship? That's what we're going to have. And I want to be somebody who's capable of that. That's what it really takes. Okay. Thanks so much, everybody, and have a good weekend, and I'll see you again next month.